Imagine this. You wake up one morning and the world is utterly silent. Not the peaceful kind, the oppressive, suffocating silence that makes your skin crawl. You step outside and people go about their day, buying coffee, scrolling on phones, heading to work. But something is off. Their eyes are vacant, their movements mechanical. You speak, but they don't really hear. You ask a question, and they repeat slogans. You challenge an idea, and they recoil not from logic, but from fear. You begin to wonder, are they really alive, or just rehearsing a script they never wrote? Now imagine this is a nightmare. This is your actual life. It always has been. The world doesn't need chains and cages anymore. We carry them inside us. Invisible scripts inherited from voices we never questioned. Teachers, parents, politicians, algorithms, the dead weight of a billion ancestors. And in this theater of the mundane, where everyone performs normal, to awaken, to feel with unbearable intensity, to think without rails, is treated not as freedom, but as heresy. Now here's the paradox. The modern human believes they are more liberated than ever, free to choose careers, lovers, identities, even realities. But what if this freedom is just another illusion, one crafted not to liberate, but to placate? What if, in chasing comfort and acceptance, you unknowingly forfeited the one thing that made you you? What if the most dangerous prison is the one that whispers, "You're already free"? Nietzsche once said, "God is dead." It was not a celebration. It was an autopsy. He wasn't announcing freedom. He was diagnosing a spiritual collapse. In killing God, we also kill the archetype of transcendence, the higher calling, the absolute measure by which we once defined our meaning. But did we replace it with anything noble? Or did we just bury the corpse under consumption, distraction, and moral relativism? You see, Nietzsche wasn't warning us about religion. He was warning us about the herd, about the terrifying ease with which people abandon critical thought for safety in numbers, about how easily the crowd labels dissent as madness, depth as arrogance, solitude as disease. He saw it all coming, a future where truth is diluted, greatness is mocked, and mediocrity is moralized, where rebellion is commodified, and real individuality becomes indistinguishable from isolation, a future where we would no longer need chains, because we had already internalized them as virtues. And that future is now. Look around. How many people do you know who act out of conviction rather than conformity? How many who are willing to suffer for their own beliefs instead of hiding behind popular ones? How many who can stand utterly alone, not just physically, but philosophically, and not flinch? Now look inward. What parts of your identity were really chosen? Which values are truly yours? And which were installed like software you never agreed to but learned not to question? Whose voice echoes when you doubt yourself? Whose standards are you actually trying to meet? And what if the version of you that society accepts, applauds, even loves, is not the real you at all? What if that version is a ghost, a hollowed-out God, a broken God? You were not born to serve the herd. You were not born to conform. You were not born to rot slowly in a padded cage of comfort, productivity, and quiet desperation. You were born to rebel against the script, to become something terrifyingly alive, something sacred and strange and sovereign. But here's the catch. To become that, truly and fully, you must face a question that most people spend their entire lives avoiding. What if everything you were taught about being good, right, successful is a lie? What if goodness itself has become the new tool of oppression? What if the greatest sins today are not hatred or violence, but authenticity, depth, and unflinching self-honesty? What if salvation doesn't come from being accepted, but from risking rejection, not from fitting in, but from shattering the mold entirely? What if your suffering is not a glitch in the system, but the signal that your soul is waking up? Imagine that. You, standing at the edge of a world that has normalized sleepwalking. You, on the verge of remembering something ancient and dangerous, that you are not a cog, not a pet, not a subject, but a god in exile. And gods were never meant to kneel. So the question becomes, what broke you? Not in the sentimental, therapeutic sense, but in the existential one. What turned you from a sovereign soul into a compliant servant? What turned your fire into a flicker? And more importantly, What will it take to awaken? The clock is ticking. The silence grows louder. And the next step is not a conclusion. It's a confrontation. Because before you can escape the herd, you must understand how you were branded. There's a strange kind of violence that never leaves bruises. It doesn't scream. It whispers. It doesn't bind with ropes or chains, but with smiles, applause, expectations. It doesn't tell you, don't be yourself. Instead, it says, be realistic, be nice, fit in, be likable. It hides in praise. It nests in tradition. It wears the mask of love. This violence is not external. It is domestication. And the terrifying truth is this. You were trained to be tame. From the moment you were born, the process began not with malicious intent, but with inherited blindness. Your parents, themselves molded by the machinery of compliance, unknowingly passed down the same collar. So did your teachers, your culture, your heroes. You were taught how to speak, what to desire, how to behave, what to fear, not by tyrants, but by well-meaning shepherds of the herd. But here lies a deeper problem. Domestication isn't about education. It's about predictability. What society calls raising a child is often just code for installing a control panel inside them, so that one day they will control themselves. No need for whips, just guilt. No need for prisons, just shame. And the wild creature, the sovereign will, the defiant spark that gets buried beneath layers of conditioning so thick you forget it was ever there. Carl Jung called it the process of individuation, the painful awakening of the self from the collective unconscious. Most never even attempt it. Why? Because individuation requires a dismantling of everything the ego clings to. It demands a confrontation with the shadow, the repressed, denied parts of yourself that don't fit the script. The rage, the lust, the grief, the ambition, the heresy. But these dark impulses are not evil. They are raw energy, primal, divine. And when you repress them to fit into the herd, you don't become good. You become fractured. You become safe and secretly resentful, polite but numb, functioning but hollow. Nietzsche saw this fracture with prophetic clarity. He called it slave morality, a system born from the weak and fearful, who, unable to claim power, redefined power as evil. In this inversion, strength became cruelty, ambition became selfishness, and obedience became virtue. The lion was tamed not by chains, but by convincing it that its roar was shameful. Thus, modern man became a creature of contradictions. He craves freedom, but fears standing alone. He wants truth, but only if it doesn't hurt. He praises authenticity, but only when it's palatable. He envies greatness, but secretly hopes it fails, because deep down it reminds him of everything he abandoned. And so he hides, behind morality, behind modesty, behind normal. But what is normal, really? Normal is the graveyard of the real self. It is a sum total of compromise, fear, and consensus. It is not sanity, it is sedation. Arthur Schopenhauer once said that most people take the limits of their vision to be the limits of the world. But these limits are not real. They are inherited beliefs hardened into invisible cages. And when you question them, when you push against the bars, people don't thank you. They panic, because your awakening threatens the illusion that comforts them. This is not merely philosophical. It's psychological warfare at the level of identity. Every time you had an unconventional idea, but suppressed it to avoid judgment. Every time you felt something deeply, but wore a socially acceptable smile. Every time you sensed a lie in the culture, but chose silence instead of risk. A piece of you died. A god broke. And the herd grew stronger. Even Aldous Huxley, in Brave New World, foresaw this silent tyranny, not through violence, but through pleasure and pacification. In his dystopia, there is no big brother, no gulags, just endless distraction. Everyone is happy, and yet no one is truly free, because they've traded meaning for comfort, depth for dopamine. Sound familiar? In our world, conformity is no longer forced. It is automated. The algorithm tells you what to like. The news tells you what to fear. Your peers tell you what's acceptable, and your own mind, trained to avoid pain, shuts down any thought that threatens the status quo. But here's the ultimate horror. Most people don't even know it's happening. Their suffering has been normalized, their anxiety blamed on chemistry, their emptiness filled with consumption. They chase wellness trends and productivity hacks, hoping to patch the cracks in a soul that was never allowed to fully form. And when that doesn't work, they seek therapy not to awaken, but to become better-adjusted prisoners. Jean-Paul Sartre called this bad faith, the self-deception that occurs when you deny your own freedom and pretend to be a fixed identity, a role, just to escape the burden of radical choice. You become the waiter, the teacher, the parent, the citizen, not because it's who you are, but because it's easier than facing the void of becoming. But what if that void is not a threat, but an invitation? What if everything that makes you suffer in silence is trying to push you towards something terrifyingly beautiful? The birth of the real self. Viktor Frankl, who endured the horror of Nazi death camps, wrote that man's deepest need is not pleasure or power, but meaning. And meaning cannot be handed to you. It must be carved from chaos, wrestled from the abyss of your own becoming. But to begin that journey, you must first see the lie that tells you are broken, the lie that tells you obedience is virtue, the lie that tells you your suffering is a problem to fix, not a message to decode, the lie that says gods no longer exist. They do. They're just buried beneath layers of shame, fear, and conditioning. You were not meant to be liked. You were meant to be real. And reality is dangerous, uncomfortable, alive. So if you felt like something is wrong, not just with you, but with everything, if you felt that aching dissonance between what the world tells you to be and what something deeper whispers you truly are, you're not broken. You're awakening. But before rebirth comes death, the death of illusions, of roles, of the you that was manufactured to please, to fit, to survive. So the next question is not, how do I heal? The real question is, what happens when the mask finally cracks? Because once you see the truth, you can't unsee it. And when that happens, the world will no longer feel safe. But for the first time, it will feel real. You've seen the mask. You felt it tightening. Now imagine what happens when you wear it for too long. The world sees your face, but it isn't yours. The smile, the tone, the responses, they're precise, polished, expected. And for a while, it works. People accept you. You blend in. The system rewards you. But underneath, a quiet erosion begins. Your thoughts no longer feel like yours. Your emotions become muted, anesthetized by routine and performance. A creeping numbness takes root, so slowly you don't even realize it, until one day you stare at yourself in the mirror and think, who the hell is that? This is not melodrama. It is the slow death of authenticity. And its consequences are not theoretical. They are systemic, neurological, existential. Let's start with the brain. Neuroscience tells us that the brain rewires itself based on habit. This process, called neuroplasticity, means that the more you suppress your true reactions, the more that suppression becomes automatic. Your neural pathways are literally trained to edit yourself in real time, filtering your truth before it even surfaces. Eventually, your internal monologue is no longer your own voice. It's a committee of approval-seeking ghosts. You no longer think. You anticipate. You no longer feel. You simulate. You no longer live. You rehearse. And all of this happens beneath awareness. Psychologists have long studied the concept of learned helplessness. When animal, repeatedly subjected to unavoidable pain, eventually stops trying to escape even when freedom is possible. Humans are no different. Conditioned to believe they are powerless, they internalize the cage and stop questioning it. But there's a darker layer. Learned helplessness doesn't just make you passive. It makes you compliant. And compliance, in a world ruled by soft manipulation, is the perfect currency. The compliant don't question. They purchase. They obey. They scroll. They smile as they fade. And here's the brutal irony. The more someone performs a version of themselves that society demands, the more society praises them. The more they repress their rage, their sadness, their intensity, the more they are labeled as well-adjusted. But what is adjustment to a sick society except a symptom of infection? We call this success. We celebrate the broken. Now step back and look at the societal scale. The modern world is not filled with tyrants. It is filled with cowards pretending to be virtuous. People who parrot opinions they don't understand, cheer for causes they don't research, condemn dissenters they secretly envy, not because they're evil, but because they're scared. They've forgotten how to think without permission. This is a herd mentality Nietzsche feared. Not mobs with torches, but polite masses with hashtags. Not fascism of the state, but fascism of consensus. The demand that you conform not out of law, but out of fear of social death, cancellation, mockery, exile. And so, in the name of unity, we embrace uniformity. In the name of peace, we surrender our passion. In the name of justice, we destroy nuance. And in the name of morality, we crucify anyone who dares to ask the forbidden question, what if the emperor has no clothes? You see this in workplaces that reward obedience over originality, in schools that measure memorization over curiosity, in relationships that prize stability over truth, in media that feeds dopamine over meaning. But the real tragedy lies in what this culture does to the individual soul. Imagine a child, brilliant, curious, unfiltered. Now imagine every time she speaks with intensity, someone winces. Every time he cries deeply, someone says, "Be strong." Every time they deviate from the norm, someone warns, "That's not how we do things here." By the time this child becomes an adult, their fire has become a flicker. Their soul, once explosive, has been rendered manageable, polite, useful, but something remains. A flicker, a tension, a sense that something vital has been buried alive. This is where anxiety comes from, not just from trauma or imbalance, but from a soul strangled by conformity. Depression is not always sadness. Sometimes it is the spiritual starvation of a being who knows they are not living as they were meant to. And the world's response? Take these pills. Try mindfulness. Drink more water. Just be grateful. We pathologize rebellion. We diagnose authenticity as a disorder. We treat existential despair like a biochemical hiccup. But the soul is not sick. It is screaming, because beneath the synthetic calm, the rituals of routine and the metrics of productivity, something primal remains, a forgotten God, howling in the dark. And if you silence it for long enough, it doesn't disappear, it festers. It transforms. That buried self becomes rage, addiction, apathy, nihilism. You begin to sabotage yourself, not consciously, but through choices that numb you further. You stay in the job that drains you. You scroll past your own loneliness. You tolerate relationships that shrink you. You overeat, oversleep, overperform. Anything to drown out the unbearable truth. You've betrayed yourself. And the more you betray yourself, the more you resent those who don't. You mock the bold. You envy the strange. You crucify the unfiltered, because their existence threatens your illusion of peace. They are mirrors, and mirrors are dangerous when you've forgotten your face. This is why societies crucify prophets, exile philosophers, assassinate visionaries. Not because they are wrong, but because they are right. They carry the scent of freedom, and freedom is terrifying to the domesticated, because if they are free, then your cage is real, and that truth hurts more than any lie ever could. So what now? You know the price of pretending. You've seen the cost of compromise. But do you have the courage to look into the void of your own forsaken potential? Because make no mistake, the system won't save you. Therapy won't awaken you. Productivity won't heal you. The answer isn't more effort. It's more honesty. The path forward begins with a confrontation, not with society, not with politics, not even with your past, with the person in the mirror. Because before you can rise as a god, you must grieve the human you were trained to be. And that grief will set you on fire. You've stood at the edge of the mask. You've heard the scream beneath the silence. Now comes a question that changes everything. Are you willing to destroy the life you built, to save the self you buried? This is not a question of improvement. This is not self-help. This is rebellion. The sacred, violent rupture of a soul that refuses to stay asleep. It is the moment when you stop asking, "How do I fit in?" and start asking, "What do I need to burn down?" But here's the first paradox of liberation. Before you can reclaim yourself, you must be willing to lose yourself. You were never just a victim of your environment. You were also its accomplice. You consented quietly, incrementally, to your own erasure, and so your resurrection demands sacrifice. You can't simply rearrange your cage. You must tear the damn thing down. Let the herd call you arrogant. Let the world call you broken. Let your friends say you've changed. Because you must. Nietzsche said it best. One must still have chaos in oneself to give birth to a dancing star. But most people try to clean the chaos, to sedate it, to hide it behind routines, affirmations, polite goals. But chaos is not your enemy. It is your womb. It is the primordial scream from which real identity is born. It's where the masks fall, where the soul roars, where the false gods of stability crumble. So if you're trembling, good. That's the first sign of awakening. But how do you begin? You begin by declaring war on the roles you never chose. You must stop calling the things that numb you normal. The job that drains your fire, not stability. Exile, the relationship that keeps you small, not love, fear. The daily routine that makes you forget who you are, not discipline. Death in installments. Start here. Radical self-interrogation. Ask yourself the questions no one wants you to ask. Who am I when no one is watching? What do I believe that I've never dared to say aloud? What would I do if I wasn't afraid of losing everything I've been pretending to want? Then go deeper. Who benefits from my silence? Who suffers when I betray my truth? What am I willing to destroy in order to finally be whole? These are not comfortable questions. They are meant to break things. Because what needs to break is not your life. It is the lie holding your life together. Rebellion begins in the mind. Jean-Paul Sartre taught that we are condemned to be free. That is, we are cursed with the terrifying responsibility of meaning-making. There is no external authority, no cosmic script, just you, raw, vulnerable, infinite, staring into a universe that offers no instructions. But that is not despair. That is power. It means you are free to create values, to sculpt identity, to invent a life that is terrifyingly yours. No blueprints, no permission, just will, vision, and audacity. But you will need armor, not the kind that shields you from attack, but the kind that makes you unapologetically visible. This armor is made of rejection, of solitude, of misunderstood intentions. You will lose friends. You will be mocked. You will question everything. And still, you must keep going, because freedom doesn't feel like freedom at first. It feels like exile. It feels like madness. It feels like standing naked while the world points and laughs. But keep walking, because ahead lies something unspeakably sacred, your real voice. Not the voice trained to please, not the voice programmed to persuade, but the voice that knows, the voice that does not ask for approval, the voice that does not flinch when it speaks the unspeakable. You will find that voice in strange places, in the middle of a sleepless night, when your fear becomes a mirror, in the eyes of someone who sees through you and doesn't look away, in the silence after you finally say the forbidden thing and realize the world didn't end, in the moment you choose integrity over belonging again and again and again, and slowly the world begins to shift, not because it changed, but because you did, because you stopped seeking shelter in the herd, because you stopped treating your wildness as a disease, because you realize that a God is not someone who controls others, but someone who refuses to be controlled. Let history remind you, all great awakenings began with rebellion. Socrates was executed for corrupting the youth by asking dangerous questions. Galileo was imprisoned for telling the truth about the stars. Christ was crucified not for blasphemy, but for threatening the order. Malcolm X Nietzsche, Simone de Beauvoir, James Baldwin, all voices too sharp, too real, too awake. And each one stood alone before they were ever celebrated. Each one chose truth over safety. Each one bore the burden of vision. So will you, because awakening is not a group activity. You will not be clapped for. There will be no parade. You will rise alone, in the middle of your own ruins, with only a whisper in your chest that says, "Now we begin." You'll begin by writing your own myth, by shedding every mask, even the sacred ones, by reclaiming the parts of yourself you were told were too much, too intense, too emotional, too ambitious, too strange. You'll begin by realizing that you are not too much. The world was simply too small. And one day, when the dust settles and the silence returns, but this time, not as a curse, but as clarity, you'll hear it. The voice that was buried beneath roles, rules, and rituals. The voice that does not ask for applause. The voice that says only one thing, over and over again: become who you are. It begins as a whisper, then a crack, then the collapse. The old self, the constructed self, the self that obeyed and complied and feared, it dies, not with a scream, but with a sigh. And in its place, something ancient stirs. Not new, not invented, but remembered. Something you once were before the taming began. And now, you must face the most terrifying realization of all. You were never broken. The world just broke around you. It wasn't your intensity that was too much. It was their comfort that was too fragile. It wasn't your questions that were dangerous. It was their illusions that were too brittle. It wasn't your desires that were corrupt. It was their morality that was pre-packaged and empty. And so the first sacred truth emerges, not as a philosophy, but as a visceral knowing. There is nothing wrong with you. There never was. All those years of shame, guilt, hesitation, they were not signs of dysfunction. They were signs of life. They were the resistance of the soul, refusing to be erased. The quiet screams of God inside you, buried under polite smiles and socially acceptable wounds. Nietzsche called this God the Übermensch, not a man with superpowers, but one who has transcended the herd, who has revalued all values, who has become the author of their own meaning. But the truth is even deeper. The you that society praises, the efficient, humble, adaptable you, is a corpse animated by approval. It smiles, it produces, it obeys. But it does not feel. It does not create. It does not choose. The real you is not a role, not a profession, not a personality type. The real you is a question with a heartbeat. It is not here to be answered. It is here to burn. And here comes the second truth. You do not belong. And that's your power. All your life you've been taught to belong. At school, at work, in friend groups, in ideologies. But gods do not belong. They do not bend their divinity to fit in circles. They do not ask for seats at the table. They build temples out of solitude and thrones out of silence. Belonging is a seduction of the herd. It offers comfort in exchange for permission. And the moment you stop asking for permission, the moment you stop waiting to be accepted, the moment you walk away from the banquet of echoes and into your own wilderness, you reclaim everything. You reclaim your rage, not as destruction, but as sacred fuel. You reclaim your grief, not as weakness, but as proof that you live deeply. You reclaim your madness, not as dysfunction, but as clarity misread by the blind. You reclaim your joy, not as performance, but as rebellion. And then comes the final truth. There is no system coming to save you. There is no final reward, no arrival, no applause. Liberation is not a destination. It is a decision, and you must make it over and over and over again. Every time you choose truth over comfort. Every time you choose solitude over performance. Every time you choose risk over repetition. Every time you choose to bleed, not to die, but to become more real. This is the paradox of awakening. The more awake you become, the lonelier the path appears, until one day you realize it isn't loneliness at all. It's sovereignty. And sovereignty is not the absence of connection. It's the end of dependency. It's a shift from asking, "Who will guide me?" to declaring, "I will walk anyway." It's looking into the abyss and saying, "I am not afraid of your silence. I bring my own thunder." It's realizing that the highest purpose of a human life is not comfort, not survival, not belonging. It is to become what only you can become. And this is not an idea. It is not a motivational quote. It is not an aesthetic. It is a burden, a fire, a sacred oath. Because once you awaken, you can no longer pretend. You can no longer comply. You can no longer wear the mask without bleeding. But in that bleeding, something magnificent happens. You stop dying slowly and start living violently, not in cruelty, but in clarity, not in arrogance, but in intensity, not in chaos, but in creative rupture. You become a living contradiction. Gentle but fierce, grounded but infinite, humble but unconquerable. You no longer seek truth. You become it. You no longer chase freedom. You breathe it. You no longer fear death, because you've already died to everything that wasn't real. And so, standing in the ruins of everything you once believed, you see clearly God was never an old man in the sky. God was never a doctrine, a ritual, a rule. God was never something to obey. God was the part of you that refused to kneel. And now, you are that God, reborn not in temples, but in tremors, not through worship, but through war, not with salvation, but with sovereignty. You are not here to be good. You are not here to be accepted. You are not here to be safe. You are here to become so radically yourself, so uncontrollably awake, that the very fabric of the herd begins to tear. And in that rupture, others will hear the call. Not your words, but your existence. Not your advice, but your defiance. Not your success, but your refusal to die quietly. Because rebellion is contagious. And in the end, you won't need to convince anyone. You won't need to argue or persuade. You will simply be, and your being will be a revolution. So burn the script, shatter the mirror, break the God the world gave you, and then stand tall in the ashes and whisper the only prayer that was ever real. I have remembered who I am, and somewhere in the depths of another soul still imprisoned, that whisper will ignite a fire, and the gods, long thought dead, will begin to rise again, one by one, from within the herd,